Have you ever felt a connection so strong it blurs the lines you thought were unbreakable? This is the story of how a simple family visit to the farm turned into something neither of us saw coming. A week of quiet routines and familiar faces took an unexpected turn, revealing desires that had always been hidden beneath the surface. Get ready to experience a story of unspoken feelings, growing tension, and a connection that challenged everything they thought they knew about family and about themselves. In a single lingering moment, the line between us faded, pulling us into a place neither of us had expected. The night wrapped the house in a strange, almost haunting calm. I sat alone in the living room, where the steady ticking of the clock and the creak of the old floorboards were the only sounds breaking the silence. It was one of those nights soaked in stillness where every sound felt sharper and even the air seemed to carry an unspoken weight. My nephew was staying with me for the week while his parents were away, and the two of us had fallen into a comfortable routine of dinners together, chatting about his classes, his plans for the future, all the things that make you realize just how fast they grow up. He was always such a polite, reserved young man, but there were moments lately when I caught him looking at me with an intensity that left me wondering. But tonight, it seemed he was particularly quiet. The last thing he'd said to me was, "Good night, Uncle. See you in the morning," before he disappeared up the stairs to his room. I'd stayed downstairs, savoring a few moments of quiet, my book open in my lap, though my mind wandered far from the story I was supposed to be reading. There was something about his tone that stuck with me, like there was more he wanted to say, but didn't. I brushed it off, thinking I was just reading too much into things. But then around midnight, as I started to get up to head to bed, I heard a soft creak from the staircase. I froze, wondering if he was coming down for a drink or something, but when I glanced toward the stairs, all I saw was darkness. The silence felt louder after that, pressing in on me as I stood there half expecting to see him appear. When he didn't, I shrugged, deciding I was just tired, and went to bed, trying to shake off the strange feeling lingering over me. As I lay there in the quiet of my room, my mind kept drifting back to that moment, the shadow on the stairs, the weight of his words. I couldn't explain it, but something felt different. Maybe it was just the odd energy of the night, or maybe it was the fact that for the first time I was starting to see him in a new light. It was strange how just a look or a single word could change so much. The next day passed like any other. We went about our routines, but I couldn't help noticing the subtle shifts in his demeanor. He seemed distracted, his laughter a little softer, his gaze lingering just a bit too long. At breakfast, I caught him staring across the table, a quiet look in his eyes that made my heart skip a beat. "Did you sleep well, Uncle?" he asked, his tone light, but his gaze unwavering. "Yes," I replied, forcing a smile. "I did, and you?" He nodded, though something in his expression told me he hadn't slept much at all. His eyes held a hint of exhaustion, and his smile seemed almost bittersweet. I wanted to ask him what was on his mind, but I held back, not wanting to press too hard. Instead, I busied myself with clearing the dishes, trying to ignore the flutter in my chest. That evening we found ourselves in the living room again, the television playing softly in the background. We were both pretending to watch some old movie, though I couldn't have told you a single detail about it if you'd asked. My mind was elsewhere, drawn to the presence beside me, the quiet rhythm of his breathing, the subtle way he shifted in his seat as though he couldn't quite get comfortable. I felt his gaze on me, a warm weight that made me feel both self-conscious and strangely comforted. I turned to look at him, catching him just as he looked away, a faint flush coloring his cheeks. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice softer than I'd intended. He hesitated, his eyes dropping to his hands. "Yeah, I'm fine," he replied, though there was a note in his voice that suggested otherwise. "It's just being here with you. It's been nice, different. I don't know how to explain it." A strange warmth bloomed in my chest, and for a moment I couldn't speak. There was something in his words, something I felt but couldn't quite name. He glanced at me, his eyes searching mine as though he were waiting for some unspoken response. I managed a small smile, hoping it would be enough to ease whatever tension was building between us, but deep down I knew it wasn't that simple. As the evening wore on, the quiet between us grew heavier, filled with all the things we weren't saying. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, the way he shifted a little closer every now and then, almost unconsciously. My heart beat a little faster with every passing moment, each second stretching out into something charged and electric. Finally, he cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "I'm gonna head to bed," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, watching as he rose to his feet, pausing for a moment as if he had something else to say. He opened his mouth, then closed it, giving me one last lingering look before disappearing up the stairs. I sat there for a long time after he left, my mind racing. There was something unspoken lingering in the air, something I couldn't ignore no matter how hard I tried. I thought back to all those quiet moments over the past few days, the subtle changes, the things left unsaid. As I finally climbed into bed, the memory of his gaze stayed with me, haunting the darkened room. That night, I dreamed of him, not of anything in particular, just his presence, the warmth of his eyes, the softness of his voice. It was like my mind was trying to tell me something I wasn't quite ready to face. When I woke the next morning, I felt both a strange sense of calm and a lingering confusion that refused to leave. We spent the day in much the same way, sharing small moments here and there, exchanging looks that felt like they held entire conversations. As the evening came around once more, I found myself back in the living room, waiting without quite knowing why. This time he joined me without hesitation, settling into the seat beside me as though it was the most natural thing in the world. We didn't speak, didn't need to, but there was a feeling between us, a quiet tension that seemed to grow with every passing minute. Just when I thought I couldn't take the silence anymore, he shifted closer, his knee brushing against mine. I felt a shiver run through me, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I glanced at him, catching the soft intensity in his eyes, the same look that had haunted me for days. I knew then that something had changed. We were no longer just family. There was something more, something neither of us could ignore any longer. Though I didn't know where this path would lead, I couldn't deny the thrill that surged through me at the thought of finding out. I didn't think I fully realized how much had changed until I found myself looking for him in the quiet moments, waiting for those small glances, those subtle exchanges that seemed to hold a weight they hadn't before. Every time I walked into a room and found him there, a quiet thrill washed over me, one that left me feeling both exhilarated and unsteady, and yet I couldn't resist it. The next few days felt like we were dancing around each other, tiptoeing on the edge of something neither of us dared to name. We fell into a rhythm, speaking in coded words, sharing glances that lingered just a second too long, and always moving a little closer than necessary. It was subtle, nothing anyone else would notice, but to me it was like an electric current crackling beneath the surface, charging the air between us. One evening after another quiet day, I found him sitting in the backyard gazing out at the darkening sky. I stepped outside, the evening air cool against my skin, and joined him. We sat in silence for a while, just listening to the soft sounds of the night, both of us lost in our own thoughts. After a while, he broke the silence. "It's strange," he said, his voice low. "Thoughtful. I've been here so many times before, but it feels different now." I turned to him, feeling the tension settle between us again, a familiar weight that we'd been carrying without speaking of it. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I had a feeling I already knew. He hesitated, looking down at his hands before meeting my gaze. "I'm not sure. I just feel different when I'm here with you. It's like I'm seeing everything in a new way." There was something vulnerable in his eyes, something that made my heart race. I wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I reached out, placing a hand on his arm in a gesture meant to be comforting. But the moment my fingers brushed his skin, something shifted between us, and the simple touch felt far from innocent. I pulled my hand back quickly, feeling a surge of guilt and confusion. He looked at me, his eyes dark and searching, and for a moment I thought he was going to say something, but instead he just held my gaze, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, heavy and unbreakable. I could feel my pulse quicken every second that passed, adding to the tension. Finally, I stood up, unable to bear it any longer. I should head inside, I stammered, feeling a strange mix of relief and regret. He nodded, but his gaze lingered, and as I walked back into the house, I felt his eyes on me, following me until I disappeared from view. Even after I closed the door behind me, I could still feel the weight of that moment pressing down on me, a constant reminder of the lines we were both too afraid to cross. But that wasn't the end. The next day, the tension between us was almost palpable. Every glance, every word seemed loaded with something unspoken. We moved around each other like magnets, drawn together by an invisible force, yet both too scared to let it pull us any closer. I told myself that it was just in my head, that I was imagining things, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. Late that evening, as I was finishing up some work in the living room, I heard him come downstairs. He lingered in the doorway for a moment, watching me with that same intense look that had become all too familiar. I looked up, my heart racing as he took a step closer, his gaze never leaving mine. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He shook his head, moving to sit on the couch beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. "No, not really," he replied, his voice low and steady. We sat there in silence, the air thick with tension. I could feel his gaze on me, his presence a constant reminder of the unspoken feelings simmering between us. It was as though we were both waiting for something to break the silence, for some excuse to acknowledge what we both felt but couldn't say. "I've missed this," he said suddenly, his voice barely audible. "Just being here, spending time with you." I looked at him, my heart pounding. "I've missed it too," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. There was a moment of silence, and then he reached out his hand, hovering just inches from mine. For a second, I thought he would pull away, that he'd let the moment pass. But then his fingers brushed against mine, light and tentative as though he were testing the waters. My breath caught, but I didn't pull back. Instead, I let my fingers curl around his, feeling the warmth of his hand, the steadiness of his touch. We sat like that for what felt like an eternity, neither of us daring to speak, afraid that words would shatter the fragile connection we'd found. His hand was warm in mine, grounding me in a way that felt both comforting and terrifying. I could feel my heart racing, my mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts, each one more confusing than the last. Finally, he broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder if things could be different?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, loaded with implications that neither of us was ready to confront. I looked at him, my heart pounding as I searched for an answer. "Sometimes," I replied, my voice shaky, "but it's complicated." He nodded, a small sad smile tugging at his lips. "I know, but I can't help wondering." There was something vulnerable in his gaze, something that tugged at my heart, even as I tried to ignore it. I wanted to reach out to reassure him, to tell him that everything would be okay, but I knew that would be a lie. Nothing about this was simple, and pretending otherwise would only make things worse. We sat in silence, the weight of his words lingering between us. I wanted to say something, to find the right words to make sense of the chaos swirling in my mind. But before I could speak, he leaned forward, his gaze intense, and for a moment I thought he was going to kiss me. The thought sent a thrill through me, a forbidden spark that left me breathless, but just as quickly as it came, the moment passed and he pulled back, his expression conflicted. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice heavy with regret. "I shouldn't have." "It's okay," I interrupted, feeling a strange sense of relief mixed with disappointment. "We don't have to. It doesn't have to mean anything." He looked at me, his gaze searching as though he were trying to read something in my expression. "Doesn't it, though?" he asked, his voice barely audible. The question caught me off guard, hard, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to deny it, to brush off the feelings that had been building between us, to pretend that everything was fine, but deep down I knew that would be a lie. "Yes," I admitted finally, my voice soft. "Maybe it does. The silence that followed was thick with tension, filled with all the things we couldn't say. I could feel my heart racing, my pulse pounding in my ears as I looked at him, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me. This was dangerous, and we both knew it, but for some reason I couldn't bring myself to look away. We sat there, the room bathed in the soft glow of the lamplight, the unspoken feelings hanging between us like a fragile thread, ready to snap at any moment. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain: there was no going back. We had crossed the line, even if we hadn't meant to, and nothing would ever be the same. He stood up, breaking the spell that held us both captive. "I should go to bed," he murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper. I nodded, unable to find the words to respond. I watched as he walked away, his footsteps soft and hesitant, and for a moment I felt a pang of regret, wondering if I'd made a mistake by letting things go this far. But as he disappeared up the stairs, I knew that the choice was already made and there was no turning back now. The night felt heavier after he was gone, the silence louder, more oppressive. I lay awake for hours, replaying every moment in my mind, the memory of his touch, the weight of his gaze, each one a reminder of the forbidden territory we had ventured into. Even as I lay there telling myself it was wrong, that it could never happen again, a part of me couldn't help but wonder if it was only the beginning. The days drifted by in a strange haze, each one filled with an unspoken tension that seemed to linger between us, growing stronger with every passing moment. We moved around each other carefully, as though we were both afraid of something we couldn't quite name. And yet I couldn't deny the pull I felt whenever he was near, the way my heart seemed to race at the sound of his footsteps or the warmth of his presence. One night, as the house lay quiet and still, I found myself unable to sleep, thoughts of him swirling in my mind, refusing to let me rest. I tossed and turned, trying to shake the feeling, but it was useless. My mind kept drifting back to the look in his eyes, the way he'd held my gaze, silently asking questions neither of us dared to voice. Without thinking, I got up, wrapping myself in a robe as I padded down the hallway. His door was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of light spilling out into the hallway. My heart pounded as I approached, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door, unsure if I should knock or turn back. But before I could decide, I heard his voice, soft and tentative. "Uncle, is that you?" Caught off guard, I froze, but then I managed to reply, my voice barely a whisper. Yes, I couldn't sleep. There was a brief pause, and then he said, "Come in." I stepped inside, my pulse quickening as I saw him, sitting on the edge of his bed, his gaze meeting mine with a softness that made my breath catch. The room was dimly lit, casting shadows that seemed to accentuate the tension hanging in the air. I closed the door behind me, feeling a sense of finality in the soft click of the latch. He looked at me, his expression unreadable, and for a moment neither of us said anything. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on us, heavy and charged, filling the space between us with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "It's strange, isn't it, how things feel different?" I nodded, my throat tight as I struggled to find the words. "Yes, I feel it too." There was another pause, and then he reached out his hand, brushing against mine. The touch was gentle, almost tentative, but it sent a shiver through me, leaving me feeling both exhilarated and unsteady. I looked at him, my heart pounding as I saw the same mix of emotions reflected in his gaze. Slowly he leaned closer, his hand still resting on mine. "I don't know what's happening between us," he murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper, "but I can't seem to stop thinking about you." The words hung in the air, each one laden with a meaning that neither of us could deny. I felt my heart race, my mind a whirlwind of emotions as I searched his gaze, trying to make sense of what I was feeling. Part of me wanted to pull away, to put an end to the tension that had been building for so long, but another part of me, one I could no longer ignore, wanted nothing more than to close the distance between them. Without realizing it, I leaned forward, my eyes drifting to his lips, my pulse racing as he met me halfway. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as though we were both afraid to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. But as his hand moved to cup my face, pulling me closer, the hesitation faded, replaced by a rush of emotions that left me breathless. We pulled apart for a moment, both of us slightly dazed, our breathing uneven as we looked at each other. I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the same mix of excitement and fear that I felt. But before either of us could speak, he leaned in again, his lips meeting mine in a kiss that felt deeper, more certain, as though we were finally acknowledging the feelings we'd been holding back for so long. As we embraced, our bodies swayed together, melting into each other's warmth. His arms enveloped me, holding me tight, and I felt an overwhelming sense of belonging. The tension and unspoken words dissolved, replaced by an undeniable connection. In that fleeting instant, nothing else existed. Our hearts beat as one, our breaths intertwined, and our souls resonated. We couldn't control the pull between us. It was as if our bodies had a language of their own. The world around us faded, leaving only the gentle pressure of his touch and the soothing rhythm of his heartbeat. I felt whole, my emptiness filled by his presence. Time stood still as we surrendered to the moment, our emotions entwined like the threads of a tapestry. Our connection was undeniable, a force beyond our control. But as the reality of the situation began to sink in, I pulled back slightly, feeling a rush of conflicting emotions. I looked at him, my mind racing as I tried to process what had just happened. We shouldn't, I murmured, though my heart ached at the thought of pulling away. He nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor, but he didn't let go. Instead, he held me close, his arms wrapped around me in a way that felt both comforting and terrifying. "I know," he whispered, "but I don't know if I can stop." There was a vulnerability in his voice, a raw honesty that left me feeling both exposed and understood. I could feel the same vulnerability in myself, the same yearning that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long. And despite the uncertainty, despite the fear, I couldn't bring myself to let go. We sat there in silence, wrapped in each other's arms, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I could feel his heartbeat against mine, a steady rhythm that seemed to calm the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. I knew that this was dangerous, that we were treading on thin ice. But in that moment, I couldn't bring myself to care. Eventually, he leaned back, his gaze searching mine. "I don't want to lose this, whatever it is," he said, his voice soft and uncertain. "But I don't want to make things harder for you either." His words tugged at my heart, filling me with a strange sense of sadness and longing. I wanted to reassure him, to tell him that everything would be okay. But the truth was I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know how to navigate the emotions that had taken hold of me, or how to reconcile the feelings I couldn't ignore. All I knew was that in that moment, I didn't want to let go. I reached out my hand, resting on his cheek as I looked into his eyes. "We'll figure it out," I whispered, hoping that my words would be enough to ease his fears. "Whatever happens, we'll find a way." He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips as he leaned into my touch. And as we sat there wrapped in each other's arms, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. A quiet certainty that no matter what happened, we were in this together. For the first time in days, the tension between us seemed to ease, replaced by a quiet understanding that words couldn't capture. As I drifted off to sleep that night, my heart still racing from the memory of his touch, I knew that things would never be the same. But at that moment, I didn't care. All that mattered was that we had found each other and that somehow we would find a way to make this work. The days that followed were filled with a strange, unspoken understanding. We moved around each other with a closeness that hadn't been there before, something deeper than we could explain, something that went beyond mere words. We didn't talk about that night, didn't try to put labels on what had happened, but it lingered between us, as tangible as any memory. The house felt different now. Every room held a hint of those shared moments, each glance and touch carrying a weight that left me breathless. And yet there was an undercurrent of fear that seemed to creep into even the quietest moments. A reminder that we were walking a line we couldn't cross without losing everything we knew. One evening after dinner, he lingered in the kitchen as I cleaned up, leaning against the counter watching me in that quiet, intense way of his. I could feel his gaze, a warmth that wrapped around me like a soft embrace, and I couldn't help the small smile that crept onto my face as I wiped down the counter. "You're in a good mood," he remarked, a teasing glint in his eyes. I shrugged, trying to keep my voice light. "Maybe I am." He chuckled, the sound low and comforting, and for a moment everything felt perfectly normal, as though we were just two people enjoying each other's company. But then he took a step closer, and I felt my heart skip a beat, the atmosphere around us shifting once more. Before he could speak, he reached out, his fingers brushing against my hand, lingering just a moment longer than they should have. I looked up at him, feeling the weight of his gaze. And in that instant, it was as though the rest of the world faded away, leaving just the two of us in that quiet, suspended moment. "I don't want this to end," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I don't know what it is, but I know I don't want to lose it." His words hung in the air, a quiet confession that left me feeling both elated and uncertain. I wanted to tell him that I felt the same, that this strange connection between us was something I'd come to cherish. But there was a part of me, a cautious voice in the back of my mind, that reminded me of the risks. The lines we were dancing dangerously close to crossing. "It doesn't have to end," I replied softly, my heart pounding as I spoke the words I'd been holding back. "But we have to be careful." He nodded, his gaze never leaving mine, and I could see the understanding in his eyes, the same mix of excitement and caution that I felt. We both knew that what we had was fragile, something that could shatter if we weren't careful, but in that moment I was willing to take the risk. The days turned into weeks, each one filled with quiet moments that seemed to stretch out endlessly, as though time itself was holding its breath. We shared everything in those days, the laughter, the silence, the unspoken words that lingered between us. It was as though we'd created our own little world, a place where nothing else mattered except for the feeling we found in each other's presence. But reality has a way of creeping in, no matter how carefully you try to keep it out. One morning, as I was sipping my coffee and watching the early light spill into the kitchen, he entered the room, a serious expression on his face that immediately put me on edge. He didn't speak at first, just stood there watching me with a look that held a hint of sadness. Finally, he took a deep breath as though steeling himself for what he was about to say. "Uncle, I've been thinking maybe it's time for me to go to take some space." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt my heart clench, a wave of disbelief washing over me. "What?" I thought. My voice trailed off, unable to finish the thought, the fear and confusion welling up inside me. He looked away, his jaw tight as he struggled to find the right words. "I need to figure out who I am, what I want, and I can't do that if I'm here caught up in all of this." There was a raw honesty in his words, a truth that I couldn't ignore. Deep down I knew that he was right, that we couldn't keep pretending that this was sustainable, but knowing it didn't make it any easier to accept. "When are you leaving?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Tomorrow," he replied, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I've already packed." The finality of his words settled over me like a weight, a reminder that our time together was slipping through my fingers, no matter how tightly I tried to hold on. I wanted to argue, to beg him to stay, but I knew that it wouldn't change anything. He had made his decision, and I had to respect it. The next day passed in a blur, each moment filled with a bittersweet awareness of the impending goodbye. We went about our routine, exchanging smiles and laughter, but there was a sadness in his eyes that mirrored my own, a quiet understanding that we were cherishing our last moments together. As the evening approached, he stood by the front door, his bags at his feet, and looked at me with a softness that left me breathless. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I know that meeting you like this, sharing this with you, it meant everything to me." The words pierced through me, leaving me feeling both whole and broken at the same time. I forced a smile, reaching out to take his hand, Savoring the warmth of his touch one last time, it meant everything to me, too. He gave me a small, sad smile, and I could see the struggle in his eyes, the same mix of emotions that I felt. We both knew that this was goodbye, but neither of us could bring ourselves to say the words out loud. Finally, he leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead, a gesture filled with all the things we couldn't say. I closed my eyes, savoring the moment, memorizing the feeling of his lips against my skin, the warmth of his hand in mine. And then just like that, he pulled away, his gaze lingering on me one last time before he turned and walked out the door. As I stood there watching him disappear down the driveway, a wave of emotions washed over me, sadness, gratitude, and a quiet sense of closure. I knew that our paths might cross again someday, that we might find each other in some distant future. But for now, I had to let him go, to let both of us find our own way. I closed the door, feeling the weight of the silence settle over the house, a reminder of the time we had shared, the memories that would stay with me long after he was gone. There was a part of me that ached, a part that wanted to hold on to every moment, every touch, every glance. But I knew that this was the only way, the only path that would allow both of us to grow, to move forward. In the weeks that followed, I found myself drifting back to those memories, replaying each one in my mind, savoring the sweetness and the sorrow that came with them. And though it hurt, I found a quiet strength in the knowledge that we had shared something real, something that had touched us both in ways we couldn't explain. Life continued, each day bringing a new reminder that nothing stays the same forever. And as I moved forward, carrying the memories of our time together like a quiet melody in the background, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. They had found each other, if only for a brief moment in time. And even though they'd had to let go, I knew that what they'd shared would stay with me, a soft, lingering presence that would never fade, and in that I found comfort. Thank you for listening to this emotional LGBT story. If you were moved by this tale of unexpected love and connection, please hit that like button to show your support. Subscribe to LGBT Stories for more heart-wrenching and romantic stories just like this one. And tell us in the comments below, what did you think of their journey? What would you have done? We love hearing from you.